Hi boys and girls. So nice to see you today. I was just doing some gardening. Have you ever done gardening at home before? I know a lot of people are extra excited about growing their own vegetables this year. Have you ever thought about what it might be like to grow some veggies of your own? Do you already do that now? How do you help? You know, just because you're a kid doesn't mean that you can't help with gardening or big things. Today's guest is actually a kid, and it's my niece Kaya. She's gonna give us a little tour of her vegetable garden out in California, because over there, it's sunny enough to have a vegetable garden started already. Of course, we have to wait a little bit, but let's take a look. All right, Kaya, show us your garden.
Hi, I'm gonna show you what me and Mom planted in our garden. We planted some strawberries and some beans, which are doing really good. And some corn over here. Some cucumbers over here. Bugs and animals are biting them though. This one's doing really good though. And a tomato plant we got from school. Mom, what's wrong with the chives?
They didn't grow.
Why?
We can try again.
Okay. The dirt looks really nice, doesn't it?
Yeah. All right. Want to say bye?
Bye!
Wow, Kaya, you really know your way around that garden. Thanks for sharing that with us. It was so nice to see you. Well, kids, I think gardening is a really fun activity to do at home. It's something that you could think about because it's a meaningful activity where you actually get to learn about the life cycle of a plant hands-on, and then you can go ahead and eat whatever you make after. Sometimes the grocery stores these days don't always have the things that we want, so why not grow it yourself? Did you know that this isn't the first time that gardening has been an extra special activity throughout history for families and children to enjoy together? Looking back in history, people would garden so that they would have a lot of food, and they would call those victory gardens. And victory gardens were considered really patriotic too. It was like showing your American way. And that was because no matter where you were in the country and what you believed in, whether you were a red state or a blue state, you were still gardening. And that idea still brought us all together and united us together as the United States of America. So I think we should take a look back in history so that we can learn a lot more about victory gardens and how important they were. So I'm thinking that we do a little time traveling and go to a tea party with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a first lady in 1943. All right, are you ready to go? This is our first time using our imagination to time travel. Let's give it a go. Wow, I can't believe that actually worked. Why is everything in black and white? Is this what 1943 looked like? Thanks so much for joining us, Mrs. Roosevelt. How do you take your tea?
Caitlin, please. We have been friends for so long. Call me Eleanor. I cannot take credit for the idea of the Victory Garden. It started in England before World War I, when food was being rationed and it was very, very hard to get food. You know the British, they love their gardens. Well, in this particular time, they decided to take a break from planting the flowers that they love so much. They took to the soil and started to plant fruits and vegetables.
Can you tell me, do you have a favorite garden?
My favorite were when I went into the schools, one particular school where children were planting vegetables and fruits with their teacher. In fact, it inspired me so much to think about a victory garden at the White House. I asked the gardener to help me, and he started the garden. But a very special friend helped, Diana Hopkins. Her father works in the White House for my husband. She helped plant the garden, but not only did she help plant it, she actually is so serious And every day before school and every night after school, Diana comes to make sure the plants are okay. She loves the tomatoes the most.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really learned so much more about victory gardens, and I'm sure that this victory garden will really serve as inspiration for others to come, and maybe they'll plant their own gardens.
Did serve as a great inspiration to, I would say, millions of Americans who planted victory gardens. And I would get hundreds and hundreds of letters telling me how their gardens were growing.
Thank you again, Eleanor, and I can't wait to see you for tea soon. You know, it's so funny that Eleanor mentioned that story about Diana in the White House, because I actually have it here with us. But I think we better go back to the present time for this, because the pictures are nice and you probably don't want to see them in black and white. Hey, it worked. We're back in normal time again. Well, we're about to read the story called Diana's White House Garden by Elisa Carbone, illustrated by Jen Hill. It is based on a true story. There really was a little girl named Diana in the White House in 1943. We're not going to read the whole story because it is pretty long, but we're going to skip around to make sure that you get the whole story. Diana Hopkins lived in a White House. The White House. She lived there with her father, Harry Hopkins, who was the president's chief advisor and the groundskeeper, and of course, President Roosevelt and his wife, Eleanor. It was 1943, and the White House was a busy place. "We all need to do our part to win this war," President Roosevelt said. Diana wanted to do her part, but what could a 10-year-old girl do? One evening, Diana went to the Oval Office, where her father was chatting with President Roosevelt. She stood near the president's chair and played with the toys on his desk. There were little carved donkeys and elephants and a teddy bear named Uncle Teddy. "Harry, I've decided I want most of the food our farmers grow to go right to our soldiers to make sure that they're well fed and strong," the president said to Diana's father. Mr. Hopkins frowned. "But then what will our civilians eat?" he asked. "I have a plan," said President Roosevelt. "I want people to grow their own food." Mr. Hopkins raised his eyebrows. The president continued, "I want every backyard and vacant lot turned into a garden. That way our soldiers and our citizens will be well fed and strong. We'll call them victory gardens because they will help us win the war." Diana's father nodded. "An excellent idea, Mr. President." Diana adjusted the little red tie on Uncle Teddy's neck. "To get the ball rolling, Mrs. Roosevelt and I want to start a victory garden right here on the White House lawn," said the president. Diana's eyes grew wide. "A victory garden in her own backyard?" "We'll need someone to plant the garden and tend it," said the president. Diana sucked in her breath. "I could help," she blurted. President Roosevelt looked at her. "An excellent idea," he said. "She looks really excited to help." Diana's father bought her a pair of overalls so she could get to work right away. Mrs. Roosevelt chose a spot on the south lawn right next to the driveway where there was lots of sunshine. Diana worked with George, the groundskeeper. They turned over the soil. They fertilized with chicken manure. Then Diana planted bean seeds and carrot seeds, cabbage plants, and tomato plants. She went to her garden each morning before school. On Monday, Mrs. Roosevelt showed her how to water. On Tuesday, George taught her how to weed. On Wednesday, she watered all by herself. Soon, the beans and carrots sprouted, and tiny green tomatoes appeared on the tomato plants. Who's ever seen that happen in their garden? One morning, Diana stepped out onto the White House lawn. The sun shone brightly, and dew sparkled on the boxwoods and magnolia trees. Everything was beautiful and alive. She went to go see her garden. But what she saw shocked her. Half of her seedlings were gone. Diana gasped. She leaned over to inspect the tiny stubs. Then she heard a rustling. "Rabbits!" Diana scowled. If she couldn't get this garden to grow, she might never find a way to help with the war effort. She wagged her fingers at Fala. "Your job," she said, "is to keep those rabbits out of my victory garden." Then she stomped inside for breakfast. That's a little bit of a problem. Sometimes in gardens, things don't always go the way that we want. Eleanor Roosevelt helped Diana replant. "Sometimes we just have to start over," said Mrs. Roosevelt cheerfully. Soon, the new seedlings came up healthy and strong. Diana kept them watered and weeded. The tomatoes were getting bigger, but none of them were ripe yet. Diana wondered when there would be something to harvest. "Fala, gardens sure do take a lot of waiting," she said. It's true. You need a lot of patience to garden. Fala kept a watchful eye on the garden. He chased those rabbits all the way to Pennsylvania Avenue. It looks like they solved that problem in a few ways. One day, Mrs. Roosevelt told Diana to dress in her overalls, brush her hair, and meet in the garden. Diana did as she was told, but when she got to the garden, there were two strangers with Mrs. Roosevelt, a man and a woman. "Ah, the little girl who is inspiring the whole country," the woman said, as she reached in to take some pictures. "How does it feel to be helping with the war effort?" the man asked. He held a pad of paper and a pencil, ready to write down her answers. Diana straightened up tall. "It feels very good," she said. She only wished that there was something to eat in the garden for the woman to take pictures of. She's been waiting a very long time for that food to grow. A few days later, her father brought her a newspaper. "You're getting famous," he said. There was a picture of her dressed in overalls, hoeing the garden. "Diana farms her White House plot," the headline read. The article went on to say how all across America, people were plowing up city parks and vacant lots, backyards and even front yards, and planting fruits and vegetables. President Roosevelt's plan was working, and she was an important part of it. One morning, Diana walked toward her garden and something caught her eye, something red. What could it be? She went closer. The tomatoes were finally ripe. But that wasn't all. Beans hung like slim fingers, and carrots pushed their orange shoulders out of the ground. Diana ran inside to find Mrs. Roosevelt. "Are they ready to eat?" she asked. Mrs. Roosevelt came to see. She smiled. "Yes, Diana, take a basket and harvest our supper. Cut the biggest cabbage too. We'll have a feast." That evening, the White House cook made a wonderful supper: beef stew with carrots and green beans, cabbage salad, and sliced tomatoes. Everyone cleaned their plates. "Diana, you've done a fine job," said President Roosevelt, "and not just in your own backyard, but for the whole country." After supper, Diana went outside to her garden. Fireflies flickered on and off. She patted Fala on the head. "You know what?" she asked Fala. "We both did a fine job." So that was a really nice book that explained a little bit about Victory Gardens back in 1943. Gardening can just be a really great way, again, for kids to learn life cycles of plants, maybe to even learn a little bit of patience, and to do an activity at home that requires a lot of work, but also in the end it really begins to pay off because you get to eat whatever you work toward. So you might want to think about just starting with a seed and seeing where it takes you.
I came from a seed. Hello, I'm not even in this video.
Sorry about that, Wilson. We've just been really busy outside today, and we're gonna start getting ready to plant some seeds and eventually grow a garden. Yeah. Let's not tell him that we plan on eating those plants.
Eating those plants?
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope you think about maybe starting with a seed and seeing where it takes you at home.
Please don't eat me. Bye.